you so much, Lance, for coming to present to us at the Madison DX Club August 2020 meeting. I just want all the participants to know that we are recording this session. For those of you who aren't real familiar with Lance, he's somebody I came across when I first got back on the air about 10, 11 years ago, and began hearing all about EME. And I quickly learned that he is one of the foremost proponents of EME in the world. And he's really done a whole lot to advance things. And in addition to that, he's quite a de-expeditioner, and I know that he's given some new ones, particularly into the Pacific, to a lot of people. And so we're all grateful for that, Lance. With that, please go ahead as you see fit.
Okay, let me see if I can figure out how to do this now.
Okay.
So I share the screen to start with. And then I think we just do this. So can you see this? I can't see anything from Zoom anymore.
Yeah. You're good to go.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you all for coming, and thanks for the opportunity to share one of my passions. As Bob said, I'm kind of hooked on EME. I started back in the 70s. I actually tried it back in the 60s, but I just didn't have the stuff that it took. But my first contact was on 2 meters, and but lately I've been focusing mostly on 6. So I thought I'd provide a little bit of a background on what's going on right now on 6 meter EME, which is really starting to take off. So this is the an overview of the EME requirements for what it takes, and then I'll also provide just a little overview of some of the de-expeditions that I've been involved in on 6 meter EME. There are lots of reasons why you should never try 6 meter EME. One is the degradation is the highest of any of the VHF or UHF bands. And that's the factor combining the distance to the moon in conjunction with the background sky noise, and it's absolutely the worst on 6 meters. Usually there's about a month or about a week out of every month where you can work EME. The signals at 6 meters are very easily disrupted by the ionosphere. They might not, their MUF might not be high enough to bounce the signals back down to Earth, but it's certainly high enough to bounce them off track when they're headed to the moon. So that can be a problem. Or they can just be scattered. I've run schedules with people who are horizon only with single Yagis, and if they have inversions or they're beaming out over the ocean, their signal can be trapped by tropoducting so that the signals don't get out to the moon. And as probably most of you know, 6 meters seems to be the noisiest of bands for local noise sources. Signals after they come back from the moon are extremely weak, almost always inaudible. On top of that, the signals rotate in polarization as they go out through the magnetic field, and often they come back at right angles to your antenna, so you can't hear each other. So the signals are very rarely reciprocal on 6 meters. And as a result, the antennas never seem to be quite big enough. And the contact rates are slow. As Bob was saying before, HFD expeditions are going for numbers. that's certainly not something that you can do on EME when it takes so long to make a contact. And it's basically the worst band possible for EME. And however, when you live in a black hole for VHF, like Western Montana, you look to the bright side of things. And here are some reasons why we get excited about it. In 2002, Joe Taylor miraculously gave us 10 to 15 dB over CW, which was a game changer. It probably has more impact on 6 meters than any other EME band. It made it possible for single Yagi stations to now work EME, which really helps for de-expeditions. Another reason to get excited about 6 meter EME is that there are more 6 meter stations around the world than there are like 23 centimeter stations around the world. So there potentially is a large pool of people to work. And now even more commercial rigs and amps include 6 meters. So there are more high power stations coming on, and it's easy to get on 6 meters with commercial equipment. You don't need rooms full of test equipment and special waveguide connectors and everything else to work EME. Even a duffer like me can work EME just with standard HF kinds of equipment. The antennas are now computer designed, so they work a lot better. There are amazing equipment developments these days, just with the transistors and the connectors for the coax and the coax itself, and preamplifiers. We have so much to be grateful to the cell phone industry. It's really made things a lot easier. The computer advances have just really opened up all the software that the K1JT gave us and made it possible to really process the signals and to have them in small packages for portable use too. And so now we don't have to wait for a 1950s era solar cycle to work DX, which is important for those of us nearing the ends of our solar cycles, and with the prediction that the next few are going to be pretty poor, at least from out here in Montana. I'm sure that you guys out east will continue to work Europe all the time and Africa, but out here it's a long stretch to work anything. And the nice thing about EME is it works even from high geomagnetic latitudes like Western Montana, where we're so far from the geomagnetic equator that it's always seems to be one hop too far for us to get to propagation. But we can work EME. And one thing that's nice about it is that it's all natural. You know, there's no satellites involved or repeaters, or even as often is the case in ionospheric propagation, you have a link that's formed by a satellite or an airliner or something like that. This is one way to make it an all-natural contact. And it's growing all around the world. So lately, especially, it seems to be getting more and more popular. And you get 500,000 miles DX with every contact. So if you're a DXer, I mean, what more could you ask for? So here's my backyard. I've kind of specialized in VHF EME. So here are the requirements for what I call a real 6 meter EME station. This is one that's capable of contacting a similarly sized station.
Right.
Okay, sorry for the delay, and I won't repeat everything. We'll just go through where we were here.
Okay.
So those are the reasons why we didn't want to be on 6 meters. And here are the reasons why we do like to try 6 meter EME. And there's my setup. I'm into VHF EME. And this is the requirements for a real EME station is 14 dBd overall gain. And for a single Yagi, that could include ground gain if they're pointed on the horizon. You need a kilowatt, a quiet QTH, which is very important. Feed line loss less than 1 dB, which is pretty easy to get on 6 meters if you use good feed line. A good low noise preamplifier in the shack, which is certainly possible to put in the shack if you have low feed line loss under a dB. And since all 6 meter EME uses JT65A mode, you have to have that capability. And you're going to need to do planning. And I've got a program on my website, GJ Tracker, which is free, and you can download it and you can figure out common moon times with anybody in the world. And then you've got to have a lot of patience. And most single Yagi stations that have clear, flat terrain around them can at least start out with their antenna aimed at the horizon and get the gain that they need by using ground gain. But then you're only limited to moonrise and moonset. So one example is YU7EF, who has built a number of different Yagis, and I've worked him from all my D expeditions. He's got great ground gain. He has no elevation. Of course, the very best ground gain is like here, when the antenna can look right out over the ocean, and it gives you a negative horizon when you can look out over the ocean because of the curvature of the Earth. And of course, the problem with horizon-only stations is it's real hard to try to hit windows with DX stations. So people, you know, try to tilt their antennas up, and you lose all your ground gain when you raise your antenna up. So it's hard to raise a single Yagi. Here's a little simple hinge mount that I made. It's on my website for how to elevate a single Yagi, and this is what I take now with me on portable operations. But you can't really get it up because you'll have guy lines and everything else in the way. So really a simple way to do it is just to put up a little H-frame with 4 Yagis. And for example, about the smallest you could get by with is like the 6M5Xs from M Squared. You can see here that if they're optimally spaced, you got a little over 15 dBd gain when it's pointed up in the air. Or even if it's at 75% stacking, you've got 14 dB gain, which is our target. But you can look at the price here, they're $550 a piece. Or you can look at these MFJ CushCraft 5-element loop fed arrays. Again, they're slightly more gain, and they're couple dB less price. So they're pretty popular, and K5NA and K5DU have proven that they really work. Susan and Richard, this is a picture of their array. This is a picture of the new array in Nevada, K5XI. He activates it remotely. People are putting up even bigger arrays now. Here's N0TBs, 4x8, and his prop pitch elevation system, which would raise a tank on the end of the boom, or even bigger arrays like Dave, KJ9I now has 4x10 element LFAs. So with all of these huge antennas, it's even more incentive now for people to get on and try EME, because at least you'll be able to work one of these larger ones. There are now even cross polarization arrays, so that when the Faraday is such that the signals are not in the right plane when they come back so that you can hear them, you won't be locked out. F6BKI did the first one. He's got 4 cross 7 element crossed Yagis. You can see it's quite a mechanical challenge to have the insulated members and the masts, and then have all the phasing lines behind the antennas so that they don't get in the way. It's quite an undertaking mechanically. This is a new array of 4 7-element LFAs by HB9Q. Again, he's got crossed across arrays. You can see them horizontal and vertical, but he's got fiberglass boxes front and back holding all the phasing lines. And instead of the typical approach, he tilts the whole thing up and down like at 90 degrees compared to everybody else. So it's a novel approach, and he always transmits circular, so we can always hear him. And then he uses adaptive receiving, which is something that's done mostly up on UHF, where the computer automatically chooses the best polarization and decodes that and shows him what the angle of incoming signal is. So he can do that with his crossed Yagis. So with all these big antennas popping up, it's going to be even more fun. And hopefully there are going to be more DXpeditions motivated to add 6 meters to their operation because of it. In the last few years, for example, here are HF DXpeditions that I've worked on 6 meter EME for new DXCC. So these were pretty exciting activations. So how did I get involved in this ridiculous endeavor? Here I am working a single Yagi station from Samoa. It all started back in 1995 in December, when I almost killed myself in a hiking accident. And I decided that I couldn't wait any longer to get on 6 meters, because I'd been on 2 meters for decades doing EME. So I decided I'd get a 706. I built an 8877 for 6 meters while I was on crutches, and then I built a homebrew 7-element Yagi and got it up in time for E-skip season. And it's hard to see here because it was only 20 feet off the ground and in the trees, but there's my 7-element 75 ohm Yagi fed with 75 ohm surplus cable TV coax. And after several months of trying with very, very patient SM7 BAE and his huge array and even huger QBL amplifier, I finally worked him during my Moonrise on CW. So I thought, well, 6 meter EME will work from Montana. But some improvements have to be made. So I built this 13 element Yagi that I could elevate up to 45 degrees, and it proved to be big enough, and the thunderstorm broke it in half. And then I decided, well, I better go with something made with proper kinds of materials. So in November of '98, I replaced it with an M squared 69-foot Yagi, again with elevation up to 45 degrees, because these guy wires get in the way. That's the problem with that. So I decided, you know, I needed something where I could elevate higher, because with the single Yagi, just about when it got to moonset in Western Europe, I couldn't elevate high enough anymore. So in October of 2001, I got my 4 50-foot Yagis put up on a double H frame using 2 pieces of aluminum tower. And that's what I have today. Are you seeing also this message that your internet is unstable? In April 2002, I made my first digital 6-meter EME contact, because Joe Taylor had just introduced JT44 mode, and ZS6WB emailed me. He said, hey, we've had some luck on this down here with TEP, and it seems pretty sensitive. Why don't we try a SCED? I said, boy, I don't know. I've never done anything with digital stuff, but I'm willing to give it a try. So we ran a SCED and worked, and then I said, you know, let's just run another SCED the next weekend to see if it worked, see if it's a real thing. And we worked the next weekend also on the third lobe of my single Yagi. So I was hooked since then to go with digital for 6-meter EME. And in June 2005, I got my 6-meter DXCC. In October 2007, I had metastatic cancer and had 2 months to live. However, at NIH, they saved the day and they took out the only cancer I had in my body. So at that point, I decided I would go on 6-meter EME expeditions from then on and give out some rare countries. So during 2008, M Squared developed a high gain transportable Yagi for me. I said it had to have over 12 dB and also be able to put together and take apart repeatedly, and not gall aluminum like the T-bars and all that stuff. And so they came up with a 6M8GJ. So also while they were doing that, in May 2008, we went to Italy and visited IW5DHN. He had 4x7 at that time. Here are the parts which were later put up for his 4x9s. So there are some big arrays around the world on 6 meters now. So I thought I would work a few of them. So in March 2009, I went off to Rarotonga in the South Cook Islands. This was my first EMED expedition. I worked 28 stations. I was really thrilled with that, given all of the problems that I had there. This is a picture of what Rarotonga looks like. And here's the antenna, the prototype of the 6M8GJ. Which is now in the hands of ZS4TX, and he's been taking it around Africa, and he took it to Mauritius. So it still has lots of life left in it. Oh, and here's the best use of coconuts in the Cook Islands. The next year, I worked 52 stations on 6-meter EME from 3D2LR and from Fiji. Again, on this expedition, ZL1RS came along and worked 2-meter EME while I was working 6-meter EME. And there's the 6M8GJ on its 24-foot mast. And there, our shack was in here. The next year, I worked 44 stations plus one ionospheric contact from Western Samoa, which is now just called Samoa. And the shack was in this bungalow, and there's my antenna set up on a lava flow, hanging out over the bay at high tide. The next year, I worked 46 stations on 6-meter EME, but an additional 33 stations on ionospheric propagation from Niue Island. There's my wife snorkeling. And wherever I go, I always have some trouble with local obstacles trying to raise the antenna around palm trees or houses or bushes. Or this one was especially difficult, but by elevating the antenna while it's being raised, I got it up. The next year, I worked 50 stations on 6-meter EME plus 265 on TEP from Clipperton Island. And as I mentioned earlier, before we started, that I actually was the first contact from TX5K was my 6-meter EME contact with G8BCG. And this was during the last Moonrise. What I always try to do on my de-expeditions is find a quiet location. And I was very worried about going out with an HF group. So they decided at the last minute, we went around the island for a day or two, and then they decided to land here and set up here. So I decided that I would set up down here so that my antenna was always pointed sideways to them, and I was far enough down the beach from them that we wouldn't interfere with each other. And for the TEP to South America, I was always pointed off to the southeast, so I wouldn't be pointed at them either. As it turned out, that worked great. I landed on the beach.
It's hard to tell because they're all falling apart, so I can't count them anymore. I hope I have all the pieces. I know this big box down here has my things in it. This box, Mike's in mine, so I'll start carrying that down too.
The boxes were all soaking wet from being in the hold of the boat, so they were falling apart. It was a long way down the beach to where I wanted to set up the 6-meter station. And the only way to carry the equipment down there was on a cart by hand. And it doesn't look like it, but the temperature is about 100 degrees. I'm completely covered up because I've just, I've had metastatic melanoma, so I have to be careful to keep covered. So it's kind of a lonely end of the beach where I was setting up. But I had lots of company. So there I am with all of the stuff transported down to the 6-meter station. You can see the lagoon in the background, and in the distance you can see palm trees on the other side of the lagoon. Clipperton Atoll is got a landlocked lagoon. This is an aerial view of the 6-meter setup here. The generator is here. My sleeping quarters are here. Here's the operating tent, and the antenna is right here. You can just barely see the shadow. And that gives you an idea on the number of boobies that were around as I'm out adjusting the elevation of the antenna. So the boobies are ground nesters, and their eggs, they have to guard them, or the crabs come and eat them, or the rats come and eat them. The next year, I worked 68 6-meter EME contacts plus 5 ionospheric contacts from American Samoa. I'd been looking for several years at possible places to set up on American Samoa. It was still very much wanted, but it was very difficult to find a spot to set up because of all of the mountains that run along the spine of it, and most of the development is on the south side of the mountains. Again, on this trip, I went with ZL1RS, who you can see his antennas here for 2-meter EME, and I set up at a atmospheric observatory run by the U.S. government. And here I am setting up, assembling the antenna, and here's the mast already set up. This is where the antenna will be. Drops off 200 feet on both sides of this peninsula down to the ocean on Moonrise and Moonset. And the coconut crabs came out at night. That's the biggest crab I'd seen to that point. And the flying foxes came out at night. The next year, I found a very remote place in Micronesia at Ulithi Atoll on Falalap Island. And I had done a lot of research trying to find a remote place that had a big enough clearing so that I could put up the 43-foot long Yagi and rotate it around. And this was the best place I found, was right here. So I made arrangements to get there. The island had just been devastated by a cyclone, but I did work 37 stations plus 5 ionospheric contacts back to Guam before the amplifier blew up after 1.5 moon passes. This is where I stayed and set up here in Falalap Island. So after the amp blew up, I decided I'd try to leave, and the plane that ran weekly was just a 2-seater, or actually, I guess it could hold about 4 people, but they weren't flying that week. So I did what people told me to do, is you put all your suitcases out on the beach, and the merchant ship, which was making its initial voyage through the Marshall Islands, would see your suitcases, and they'd send a dinghy out to pick you up. And so I went back to Yap on that merchant ship's maiden voyage. The next year, I made 49 contacts on EME plus 2 ionospheric contacts from T8GJ in Palau. And again, I tried to find a very remote place where I could look out to the east or to the west out over the water. I had run schedules with a number of Japanese that habitually go down here to the main city in Roor and go to the free VIP hotel, which has a 5-element beam. And I've always heard them whenever we've run schedules, and they've never heard me because they have S9 noise. So I picked a spot that I knew was going to be, or at least I hoped it was going to be quiet. And this is a Google Earth view of the spot. And this is the raising that I did down there during the fringe of a hurricane which was going over the Philippines. Whenever I raise the antenna, I use this method on my de-expeditions. And if there's a prevailing wind, like there was here, I try to set it up so that the wind helps me rather than trying to raise it against the wind. So I use a falling derrick to give me more leverage. And that's how it's done. And that's what it looked like when it was up. Unfortunately, you can see over here on the right-hand side of this slide, there's a power line that runs right down the middle of the island also. And so when it wasn't pouring rain, which was fortunately most of the time, but when it was not, I had bad line noise on my Moonrise. So right after that, during the next month, I decided to go back to V6M, exactly where I had been before, and catch the people that I'd missed the first time around, and I made another 43 6-meter moon bounce contacts. The place was still in shambles. I had to get special permission from the chiefs of the outer islands to get out there because no tourists were allowed. But then again, there are always obstacles like that on any of these de-expeditions. Here I am, the station set up in the dry corner of the room. It was leaking everywhere else. The following year, I made 86 contacts, a new high for me, plus one tropo contact from Cocos Keeling Islands off the west coast of Australia. And there I set up in a palm grove. And here is Karen, my wife, sitting with a domesticated booby, which is trying to learn how to fly it. You can see it's just starting to get its white adult plumage. And it really loved it when Karen would throw the bird into the air so that it could coast to a picnic table or something like that. From there, we went to Christmas Island, which is up just south of Indonesia. And I saw the biggest crustaceans in the world, which they call robber crabs, which are pictured on my QSL card. There I made 106 moon bounce contacts, plus one ground wave contact to an HFD expedition that was there at the same time. Here's some boobies that were on Christmas Island. The big thing on Christmas Island, though, are the crabs. Annual crab migration every fall. They have millions of crabs come from the highlands down to the ocean. It's the red crabs. And they have special crossings underneath the road that are kind of like cattle guards that they can go underneath, and they kind of guide them around with these these metal shields to go in the right direction to go to the coast. Here's the shack that I set up in the Christmas Island Cricket Club on the top height of land on the island. From there, it was 1,200 feet down to the ocean. So I had some very, very low ground gain lobes. I also had very, very limited windows with North America, both on Moonrise and Moonset. So I felt kind of bad after that because it was so hard to work back home to North America. So I went a little bit closer the next year to another very rare spot, Nauru. Worked 119 people on 6-meter EME from there. And that was my typical luggage for the 6-meter de-expedition trips. The antenna and mast are in here. And then I put all the hardware in here, packed the radio, the amplifier I carry on. Again, with Nauru, it was typical, difficult spot to set up the antenna between storage containers and their chain link fence marking their property line. But I did manage to get it up, and I had a view out over the ocean on Moonrise. In May of the following year, I worked 111 stations on 6-meter moonbounce plus 19 on TEP from Bolivia. And this was the antenna set up in a courtyard of the hotel, set up the room in the shack here. And we had alpacas wandering around the antenna all the time. The following year, I did 106 6-meter contacts plus 1 tropo contact, which was 30 miles in the Seychelles. And I was able to find only one place in the Seychelles where I had enough room to set up. And that was in a bungalow in the National Forest on the Isle of La Digue. So there I am out adjusting the elevation. And there were lots of tortoises everywhere in the Seychelles. Next October, I'm headed off to the Austral Islands in French Polynesia. There's the station location. I'll be able to look out over the ocean on Moonrise and Moonset. That's in October. In November, this is the location where I'll be setting up in the Marquesa Islands. The call sign is TX7MB, and KB7Q will be joining me on that part of it. And he will be operating 2-meter EME at the same time from there. So there's endless DX propagation on the magic band with EME. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions?
How much power does that amp run, Lance?
Runs 1,000 watts.
Nice.
1,000 watts out. I think that they said it's possible to like run slightly more than that, but the specs are for in JT65A mode for 1,000 watts out.
What was the toughest roadblock that you overcame on any one of your trips?
It's Dave, that's pretty hard to answer because there's always something. I mean, is it the problems I had with TX5K trying to negotiate the ability to stay on the air when they wanted me to shut down and come to dinner or something, or basically to be the first station to shut down just before my moonrise on the weekend when all the people were going to be on. That was an obstacle, but certainly an obstacle in Nauru was trying to get a visa, because they don't have a tourist industry, and the only people that go there are for work. So it's a big deal to get a visa before you can even start to apply for a license. But you know, the 2 hours that I spent at customs in Bolivia trying to get the equipment through customs without bribing the customs official was a challenge too. Certainly the Seychelles, arguing with the licensing people for months but yes, they should allow me to operate 6 meters, even though in region 1 they had restrictions on operating 6 meters. And they weren't even a member of the IARU, but they still were following region 1 guidelines. The line noise on Palau, you know, the leaky rooms on Follow-Up Island, and the special approvals I had to get from the meeting of the chiefs of the outer islands, and the documentation I had to get just to be able to board the little twin-engine plane that flew once a week out there on some I can't even remember now. It's some sort of religious group that runs humanitarian aid out to the island once a week normally, and so I was able to get a flight out there with them. I don't know. There are lots of obstacles, that's for sure, on everyone.
Well, thank you for everything you do. I know that doesn't, help a lot, but we really appreciate all you go through.
Well, I'll tell you what, that there's nothing I appreciate more than to have people on the other end to contact. And the neat thing about having this huge growth that we've had in the last year on 6 meter antennas popping up all over the place. And there are 4 Yagi stations popping up in Europe now too. And that's not even to start talking about how places like Germany now are allowed to operate 6 meter EME. Hopefully at the end of the year, Russia will be able to operate EME. So we're going to be seeing lots more activity. And there are a handful of other stations who, like ZS4TX, N1DB, KO2SCA, who have been heading out on these de-expeditions. So hopefully there will be even more
also.
spots. Oh yeah. In fact, he gave me a new DXCC when they went up to activate San Marino.
Yeah.
T77, and in fact I worked him. I worked him when I was on a de-expedition somewhere. They were on a de-expedition at the same time, and that's happened twice where I worked him from a de-expedition when I was on a de-expedition.
So Lance, I have one quickie question. Are you putting, or going to be putting, as you're catching up, are you putting these EME contacts from all these past expeditions onto LOTW?
Huh.
I mean, the cards are beautiful, but just wondering.
Yeah, I've gotten that question before, and I think I put up the last couple on LOTW, and I'm going to be doing that from now on. Now that WSJT makes an ADI file, so I can just export that to LOTW. So yes, they will all be on all from here on out. If there's a need for somebody to have an LOTW confirmation on a previous DXpedition, I do go back and I put it on manually. So in answer to your question, yes, there will be more of that.
Okay.
So please get on the air and work me.
So,
We're looking forward.
so Lance, I'm sure you've used different software, you know, as they've evolved over the years, but you know, I think most people today use either WSJT version 10 or WSJTX for EME. What are your thoughts about, you know, those two? I mean, should we be kind of moving towards WSJTX for EME, or should we be staying with WSJT version 10?
I know there's been a lot of reluctance to move to WSJTX initially, and initially I did have problems with it crashing. Also, I tried it in VK9. I tried it and I had problems with it. They've since been ironed out, and it's also, you know, I ran WSJTX side by side with WSJT10 here at home for a year, and I saw on the weakest signals that the WSJTX, just as Joe said it was more sensitive, and it would decode the signals that were marginal. And so since for the last year or two, I've been using WSJTX on all my DXpeditions and here at home. And with the most recent version, they have implemented an averaging feature, which really does work. It didn't work so well before, but now it does work well. And especially if you're just going to be listening for one station. So if you're like listening to if you set up a schedule with a weak station, like I am a weak station when I'm on DXpeditions, it'll average those signals out, and over the course of a few transmissions, it will decode. So you know, my DXpedition station is what I consider to be a substandard station, you know, to have a 12 dB antenna with 1 kilowatt. But I have been able to work 7-element and 6-element Yagis that are elevated at the same time as I am. So when conditions are right, and if you're patient enough, and if the Faraday rotation is favorable enough, it's possible. You just have to be there all the time and keep trying, and that's one of the reasons why I go on my DXpeditions by myself rather than on an HF DXpedition, is because I need to be there and trying. So, but WSJTX for sure. Gee, I'm sorry for the rocky start we had tonight, but I'm glad that it finally worked.
Lance, thank you so much for the videos of the boobies that brought back many memories of my 1985 trip to Clipperton.
Lance, I have a couple questions.
You know, Clark, one of the things that impressed me about, well, Clark, just let me comment. One of the things that impressed me about where I set up, about 20 yards from the crashing surf on Clipperton Island, was I was right in the middle of the atoll at that point, and there was junk all around me, you know, that had washed,
Yeah.
that had washed in. There was plastic chairs and everything. And it really made me think, you know, that was all around where I was set up. And I felt very fortunate that we didn't have a big storm, because when you see all the stuff that had been washed where I was setting up, it meant that the water would come right through where I was. So it was a little scary. So somebody else had questions.
I had questions about
Ralph.
sizing your home station. If I was to consider a 4x7 array, right in the beginning, you had a really good picture of a prop pitch on tower. So can we start with the tower? Would you say around 55 or 65 for a good tower? And I'm thinking it only has to be 30 feet tall.
30 feet is a good height. That's what I have here. I have round 55. And what I did, you can barely see, you know, you can't see it too well in that picture, but I have tripod legs holding up, bracing the round 55 just to make sure that it's stiff enough. But if you're going to be putting up 4 7s up 30 feet, you know, round 55, 30 feet of it would be fine, self-supporting up to that height. That would be fine. That would be plenty sturdy. Round 65 is really stout, and that would be something like N0 IB would use, or N0 TB would use, round 65.
Okay.
And then if you want to put something even bigger up, like KJ9I, I mean, he's got a huge tower. But you don't need it for a small array. You don't need a huge tower. I think K5 NA and K5 DU also used round 55, didn't you, Susan? Are you still there, Susan?
You got to unmute, Susan. We use round 45, and it's got 125 cubic feet of concrete under it, and doesn't seem to want to go anywhere.
Okay. And then
Great.
that azimuth rotor, M squared 2800 or a prop pitch?
That you know, if you could get a prop pitch, I've got 3 prop pitches here that I've finally wound up putting one on each of my antennas. But I think that the Orion 2800 is good, sturdy, especially for, you know, for 4 7s. That should work. Richard, what did you use on your 4 5s?
What did I use? I missed that point.
For a rotor.
Oh, okay. I used 2 different rotors. I had an MT3000 for the elevation. It was a used one that you helped me get. For the azimuth, I've got an Alpha Spid, a small one, but it's mounted at the bottom of the tower where it's very accessible. And I've got it set up so it'd be real easy to change in just a few minutes if I had to.
And then
suggestion.
round 25 for basically the boom.
For me, you're talking about?
Well, both of you, I mean, same.
No, that's what Dick Hansen did, the boom.
Yeah, we had some help from K5A&D. He designed our boom, and it's like aluminum tubing, and it's got at least 2 smaller tubings inside of the horizontal part, and then extra tubing with inside supports for the vertical components. And the antennas only weigh about 16, 17 pounds apiece. We did splurge and get 1 5/8 heliacs. So we seem to get a lot of signal to the antennas.
Mm-hmm. I've got a lot of this stuff in my graveyard, so you're helping me decide.
You know, Ralph, a lot of people for 4 Yagis use like a 4-inch aluminum pipe and brace it front and top. But you know, to use a piece of Roan tower, I mean, I know people have done that, and on my 2-meter antenna, I use aluminum tower for the cross boom. That's an awfully heavy way to go. And your antenna, if you use something like that, is going to be more offset off to the front. So you probably will need counterbalances because you want to try to keep the weight over the center of your mast. It's really important, however you do it, to try to keep things well balanced. And one way that I've done it on a number of arrays is I make an H frame, and I've got a drawing on my website it's a double H frame where I use 2 horizontal pieces across, and then I run the vertical ones kind of in between them, and it helps with the twisting. And then I can also just push the bottom one out away from the tower so that it can be easily elevated that way. So it makes it a nice rigid H frame, but you don't need to have like you can use aluminum pipe, which is pretty strong and relatively inexpensive compared to tubing, and it's a lot lighter weight than Roan tower. But if you have 25 sections there, I mean, people have done it.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you.
Lance, you may not notice, but there's a couple of messages to you on the chat here. One is from TI2CDA. He says, "Hi, Lance. I hope you are doing great and safe." He asks the question, do you have 6-meter EME CW QSOs? If yes, what are your stats? 7.3 from TI2CDA.
Yeah, I see his note now that I check my chat messages.
Okay.
Yeah, when I started out, I started out on 6-meter EME in 1996 with my single Yagi, and there were no digital options until 2002. So once I got the 4 Yagi array up in 2001, all I was making were CW contacts still, although they were very difficult to make. I don't even bother with CW anymore because it's so difficult. People say, "Oh, your signal is CW quality." Well, that may be the case for you right now, but for me to hear you at the same time, you know, yes, I could continue to transmit for another 45 minutes so that I can start to hear you when the Faraday changes the polarity around, but you have a lot more margin on JT65. You have 15 dB more margin, so the polarity doesn't have to be exactly lined up right like it does on CW. I ran a schedule with a 4 Yagi station in VE6 because they were so adamant that they wanted to work me on CW. And I ran for an hour with both of us, 4 Yagi stations and 1500 watts. I copied him, He never copied me. And at that point, I decided, you know, I don't have the time to waste on CW trying to run with 4 Yagi stations, let alone 1 Yagi station. It's going to be JT65A, and it's, believe me, it's hard enough with that. So I don't have any statistics on how many stations I've worked on CW. I never kept track of that, but I can say that I've worked 221 stations on 6 meters, and 165 of them I've worked on EME. Obviously, I've duplicated some of them with F2 or eSkip, but I can't think of a DXCC that I well, there's one, E77. I don't think I've worked him on JT65. I worked him on CW. But other than that, everything's been on JT65A. So I hope that answers your question. And then let's see. Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Or questions for some of these other big guns that are here, like Richard and Susan or Dave or Tim? No?
Okay, well, if we're finished.
Okay, Bob.
Yeah, well, great. Listen.
Over to you.
Lance, that was just a really, really wonderful presentation. I enjoyed it very much, and I'm sure we're all very grateful to you to get on and take the time to do this for us. Especially impressive are all your de-expeditions. I mean, that's a lot of patience and perseverance and I guess a lot of guts for some of the places you went. And you made a lot of people happy with those contacts. So it's a great service to ham radio, and your enthusiasm is infectious. Thanks so much.
Well, it's easy. Thank you. It's easy to get excited about it because now I'm disappointed if I don't get over 100 contacts on each of my each of my trips now. The activity is growing that much. I mean, to think that only 10 years ago I was overwhelmed with 28 contacts.
Yeah.
And now I'm disappointed if I don't get over 100, and I'm hoping to top 119, which is my best so far, on the next trip. So I'm very excited about all the new activity that's on.
Well, that's great. I hope I have